Hello, welcome to Towards a Christian tabletop role-playing game, where I talk at length about my efforts to design a tabletop role-playing game based on the Bible. So I've talked about the talents and the dice before in video 5, and about success and failure options for general skill checks, which are called facing a trial. So this video is going to be about combat, or specifically about conflict, both physical and social. So conflict still happens, and both physical and social conflict with a non-player character are handled in the same way. So the process is as follows. The player announces what they're going to do, like they have an argument, start a fight, intimidate someone, sneak past them, run away, whatever. The mediator decides what particular talent the situation demands, and the player rolls the appropriate dice, similar to facing a trial. At the same time as the player is rolling, the mediator rolls for the NPC according to whatever general attributes the challenge falls under. So an NPC looks like this to the mediator. This is what they see. So we've got a character here of a bouncer. He's got the general stats down the bottom with the dice attributed to them, and he's also got a stress maximum. Underneath, there's a goal and a weakness. So the NPCs don't have specific skills. Each one has the 4 general attributes with dice attached to them, as well as additional points either added or taken away from that dice roll. So when rolling for the NPC, the mediator simply rolls the dice for the attribute and then adds or takes away any additional numbers from the result that the NPC has, which is represented by the additional minus or plus numbers. So after both the player and the mediator have rolled, then whoever rolls the highest wins. If there's a tie, the defender wins. Okay, the player must roll over the NPC's defense, or vice versa. The difference between the two rolls is then calculated as damage or stress, which is added as points of stress according to whichever attribute is relevant. So whether it was a physical conflict, a mental, an emotional conflict, spiritual, that's where the stress gets added to. Then that is the player's action. So a complete turn has the player's action and the NPC's response, the 2 dice rolls. And then it has the NPC's turn. They roll, and then the player rolls their response. So what this means is that each player's turn should consist of both the player and the mediator making 2 dice rolls each. So there's 1 action or attack of the player's dice roll, and at the same time the response of the opponent, so the mediator's dice roll, followed by 1 action or attack of the opponent, their response, and at the same time the reaction of the player, or the response of the player. So you essentially got the player's action and the NPC's response, then the NPC's action and the player's response in that order. So it always starts with the player, then it goes to the NPC. So the players always have the first strike, or the first action in that way. Now on their move, a character can only do 1 action. So this means only 1 thing that's done in around maybe about 2 or 3 seconds of like game time. So this includes things like, throwing a punch or a kick or grabbing or using something within reach or moving around. So movement is included as an action. Talking though, or shouting to each other, or things like that is not counted as an action. So you can talk as much as you want, and you can obviously communicate between different players. Now, the reason I'm putting this down to 1 action is so that individual players' turns don't blow out and become huge, and it takes so long to go around the table that people start getting bored because they're waiting for everybody to finish their turn. So there's basically 1 action and a reaction from the NPC, and then the next player's turn. So if we look at an example, so in this example, a player has been forced into a fight with a bouncer at a nightclub, as you do. So their character sheet looks like this. So they say they throw a punch. This is a strength roll. So they roll a d12 for their physical and get a 5 on the roll, and then add their strength score, which in this case is 2, so it's a total of 7. Then the bouncer, the mediator, needs to roll for the bouncer. They need to defend against the punch. So at the same time, the mediator rolls a d12 for the bouncer. Remember those bouncer stats, and gets an 8. The mediator then adds 3 from their physical talent area for a total of 11. This means that the bouncer either blocks the punch or dodges out of the way or does something physical to prevent it, and the mediator describes what happens. Then it's the bouncer's turn to retaliate. So the mediator decides how they will respond. Either they can punch back, they could run away, they could call out for backup, they could, grab something to use as a weapon, whatever they decide. If they punch back, then the mediator rolls the attack using a d12 plus a 3, and the player responds saying what they're going to do and rolling their dice. Either if they're responding physically, they can roll their strength dice to block or their agility to dodge, depending on what they say they do. So just an aside, by the way, if you notice on the character sheet, the character has a motivational work called Perform, which is a minor work, so it adds 2 to their roll for agility if they're using it. So the player may wish to add this work of Perform, which adds 2 additional points just for that action. But if they do, the player must explain how exactly this performance is relating to the fight. So it's got to be something that actually makes sense in the situation. What are they doing in order to add this motivational work of Perform? What are they doing in that situation? Now, when the bouncer punches back, if the roll is greater than the player's, then the bouncer's punch lands and the player takes some physical stress. The difference in points between the bouncer's attack roll and the player's defense roll is the amount of physical stress they take, and it's recorded in their stress area. Now, they have a maximum of 20. Once they get to 20 physical stress, they're unconscious. That's it. Their body can't take anymore. Now, stress only occurs if they are actively being attacked and the opponent rolls higher than their defense. They don't receive damage from their own attack. So you can attack, and as long as the other person has got, blocking a defense, it doesn't necessarily harm you. Also, by the way, if any character is being attacked from behind or by surprise, so like you're getting the drop on somebody and you're hitting them over the head, then their defense roll should be 0. So they will take the full brunt of the attack. Therefore, they take the total amount of damage or total amount of physical stress. So this is why you can knock somebody out by hitting them from behind, or by surprise. Sometimes, like when using a piece of equipment or a weapon, any equipment that you use, such as a club or something, will add an additional dice to your attack roll. So it adds additional numbers. So it'll add more points to your attack. Even if you only roll a 1, it's still going to add an additional point. Also, bear in mind that the mediator should always ask the player what they're doing in any situation. During a fight, what are you going to do next? What are you doing next? Because what they do will determine which dice they roll and how many points they should add. So, for instance, in the example of the bouncer, they may not decide to physically fight them. They might, because they're obviously pretty well outmatched by this guy, they could have decided to use their mental talents to try and talk the other person down, or they could try and influence them in some way, or bribe them, or intimidate them, or something like that. So there are different options that you can do. So this is important in the game. Just because an NPC is throwing a fist or a weapon or something's trying to fight, the player doesn't have to defend physically. If they have a higher dice and more points in another talent area, they can also attempt to stop the person from attacking them by intimidating them, or by offering them a bribe or a deal, or appealing to their friendship, or threatening to call the police or some other way. If the player's subsequent roll, if their mental or their emotional defense roll is greater than the NPC's physical roll, then they have successfully defended themselves against it. It's essentially like using the power of your personality or charisma to try and stop the person from punching you. They still have to describe what they're doing, because that will determine what kind of role it is. So what I'm trying to do is give players a number of different responses that they can choose from, rather than just always having to be a physical fight, or just always hitting something with a sword or a weapon every time. Now, NPCs can only ever be knocked out. Once they are knocked out, the players need to then actually make a choice if they want to intentionally kill them. So if they add more damage to them physically once they're unconscious and their stress goes above the limit, then they will die. But again, it's the player's choice as to whether they want to do that or not. Okay, there's no rule against it. It's basically up to the players. And of course, obviously in the game, they would face the consequences of that action. So yeah. All right, advantage and disadvantage. Advantage is applied by dice rolls, but there are two types of advantage. There is strategic and there is severe. Strategic advantage or disadvantage will involve a d4 dice. So either you add a d4 or you minus a d4 from your total roll. And strategic advantage is generally given if the player can demonstrate their character's good strategic thinking, or how they're doing, what they're doing contributes to how they're gaining advantage in a situation. The other one is severe advantage. So severe advantage or disadvantage adds or minuses a d6 dice to the normal roll after any modifiers. So if you're in a severe disadvantage, even if you roll well, you still minus that d6 dice to it. That is only decided by the mediator. So they will basically decide whether you're in severe advantage or severe disadvantage depending on the situation. And again, it's up to the mediator as to when they do it. Now, advantage and disadvantage relates to the goals and weaknesses of an NPC. So if you notice in the NPC description, each one has a goal and a weakness. Players don't know what these are. They don't get told these, but they can get clues about them through talking with the NPC or interacting with them, or noticing things around them, or occasionally getting insight or empathy or words of knowledge or things like that. If a player is trying to influence an NPC and incorporates the NPC goal, then they will have strategic advantage added to their role, and the NPC will be happy to help. If the player, though, is trying to influence the NPC and incorporates the weakness, then the NPC will have strategic disadvantage taken away from their role, so it's very similar, but the NPC will not be very happy to help and may even betray the players later. So, for example, in the case of the bouncer, the players may figure out that his goal is money and try and bribe him to let them into the club or something to not fight. And he might do so, and he might take the payment and not tell anyone else about it because he doesn't want to let anyone else know he was paid off. So he might be happy to help them in case he gets more money in the future, and he might be happy to do that. Alternatively, if they bluff their way past him by showing a fake ID or a badge or convincing him that they're some kind of authority figure and play on his weakness, then as soon as the bouncer knows he's been tricked, chances are he will actively tell everybody, those guys shouldn't be in here, we should get them out, and tell everybody that they shouldn't be there and be angry at the players for tricking them and maybe even go after them himself. So he will feel like he's been conned. So again, depends on, even though mechanically the result is very similar in the game, in the narrative, it's a very different outcome. So essentially, if players can figure out the NPC's goals and their weaknesses, then they can decide how they want to use the information. And these are kind of similar to the player's own, the character's own, the goals, the flaws, the weaknesses, which are carried on a character sheet. All right, order of initiative. The default order is just to go around the table clockwise. So players should know when their turn is coming up, and they should be able to sort of think about what they want to do. Now, if they've been playing for a while, and if they're a bit more experienced, this happened when I've been play testing, they may want to go in a different order for tactical reasons. They might say, okay, you do this, and I'll do this, then I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do that way. Or they may want to wait and see what other players do first in order to coordinate their attacks, which is fine. This is actually a good thing because players are not that powerful in the game, and I've deliberately made players not that powerful, so no one can usually just one-shot an enemy, so they do need to work together to be able to beat enemies in conflict, so it's a good thing if they're actually communicating and working together. That's one of the sort of the aims of the game. In this case, then the mediator should ask them if there is a preferred order for the conflict at this time, and make sure to obviously keep track. Maybe give everyone a token, and once it's their turn they hand in the token. The only thing to bear in mind is that every player should have only one turn per round. So obviously make sure that everyone gets one turn, even if all they're doing is standing there doing nothing. So I didn't do anything, I just stand there. That's fine. That's your decision, no worries. Okay, the next thing is distance. There are 3 different distances when characters are involved in a physical conflict. So these determines how far characters are from each other and how far they are from objects and equipment. So the first one is within reach. these are just essentially zones. So the character can reach something or someone and use the equipment or use it to affect it within that turn. So I reach and grab a bottle and smash it over his head, or I pick up the chair and do anything. The next one is nearby. So the character can reach something after one movement. So they use something on their next turn. So they've spent this movement getting to it, and then they can use it the next turn. So generally speaking, this is something within the same room. So they might need to use a turn to get out of, rush and find something on the mantelpiece or in the kitchen or something, and then come back and they can use it the next turn. The last one is far away. So the character can get there on 2 or more movements. So essentially this is outside the radius of the conflict, usually in another room or outside, like outside the house or something like that. So generally the mediator can inform players about how far away something is, which essentially means how many turns it takes to get there. But that's essentially, is this thing nearby? Is it far away? Is it within reach? That's essentially the 3 zones that you're talking about in this way. So essentially a lot of the combat does not necessarily have to be a map-based, although obviously you can use that, but it's usually much easier to sort of describe a situation and what's going on. And that's it. That's how conflict works. Hopefully I've given you a decent overview of the general mechanics of it. If you're interested in learning more about this project I'm doing, feel free to have a look at some of the other videos on this channel. And if you're still watching or interested and want to hear more, please like and subscribe. And if not, thank you for your time.